Beautiful. Thank you so much for joining me today to talk about a topic that I believe is very important, as well as under spoken about, if that's an English word. Everybody talks about daddy issues. Everybody knows how that affects us, and how we supposed to, like, how it manifests. So I've been on my healing journey for a while, and I'm realizing more and more that the more I know, the more that I don't know. And only this year I only started tapping into the father wound. I started healing my inner child, and then I got to the daddy issues, and then I was like, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. And then this year it was like there's another layer. So in the journey of healing, there's always another layer. So I believe that it's never done as long as you're on the road. So as someone who's well versed in this topic, I wanted to find out from you, what is the mother wound, firstly, and how can we identify it for ourselves as well as heal it for ourselves?
Well, the mother wound is basically just a psychological pain of not having had enough love from your mother. And this could emanate from abuse. This could emanate from neglect. It could also emanate from abandonment. And abandonment also meaning if you lose your mother to death, right? That is still emotional abandonment that could have those psychological pains that follow you all the way into adulthood. And it's not as simple as I have just explained it, because there's layers to it as well. So there is the personal motherhood, which is, that emanates from your relationship with your mother. That could be the abuse that you experience intimately in that relationship. It could be the neglect also. It could be that abandonment. So that is personal to the relationship that you have with your mother. And then we have the cultural mother wound, which is what most women everywhere actually have experienced, because it emanates from patriarchy. So we were raised by mothers who have internalized misogyny, right? Everywhere you go, you find a woman that has had the same experiences in their household, where their mother was training them to be a wife, that was training them to, cater to the male ego, or, all these patriarchal messages. I don't know if I should continue. So all these patriarchal messages, I'm just going to keep continuing, because if it's recording, then we'll just continue. Would that be okay? Can you hear me? Hello? Oh, you're muted. Hi.
Hi.
What happened?
It's the internet. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you want me to just start over?
Yes, please.
Yeah, because I realized that even when you leave, it's still recording. So I was wondering.
Yes, it is. Yeah. So I'm going to be able to put the pieces together.
Oh, so I would just continue if you are struggling with internet. If you are able to hear me, then you could. Okay, cool. So the mother wound is basically just a psychological pain of having been undermothered. So you didn't receive the amount of love required for your brain's development, right? Because children need love to develop their brain and wire their nervous system. So this mother wound is actually layered. It's not just as simple as that, as the psychological pain of abuse, neglect, and abandonment that we experience in childhood. It's also cultural, and it's also spiritual and biological, right? So when we speak about the personal mother wound, which is the layer that most people know about, most people actually speak about today, is the abuse and neglect and abandonment that you experience intimately in your relationship with your mother, right? So this could be the abuse the verbal abuse, emotional abuse, and physical abuse that you experience in your relationship with your mother. And it can also be cultural, right? So we are living in a very patriarchal society where women are expected to be a certain way, and mothers most times are the enforcers of patriarchy in their households. Many girls are raised to cater for the male ego, to, you know, cater or center their lives around wanting to be married. And that is the mother wound that most women experience, because it expects us to abandon parts of ourselves to fit in with the patriarchy, right? And then there's a spiritual or biological mother wound that is ancestral, right? So if your grandmother had experienced great trauma that she didn't deal with, that trauma may seek resolution in future generations. And also now with the studies of epigenetics becoming widely known, is we are becoming to understand that trauma is not something that just leaves the family, right? So if a grandmother experiences great trauma in the family, that changes their gene expression, and that could be passed on to the next generation, could be passed on to their daughter, who can pass it on to their granddaughter. So that trauma sort of continues in the family. So those are the layers of the mother wound. But the one that is mostly urgent for people is their personal mother wound, their relationship with this biological mother that they have, that they're trying to build a relationship with and trying to navigate that relationship. And some people even deciding, well, it's not a relationship that works for me. So that sort of wound is the one that is most urgent for people, and is the one that I speak mostly about, simply because I feel is the first layer that most people have to deal with before they can move on to the next one. And how it manifests in, in relationships and in our lives, is because we did not get the type of love that we needed for our development to be healthy, right? For our brain to develop in a healthy way, for our nervous system to wire itself in a healthy way. What happens is we end up having a dysregulated nervous system. And this could mean that then we suffer from things like depression, we suffer from things like anxiety, and we also have stress-related diseases that are as a result of that grief that emanates from our relationship with our mothers all the way from childhood. And then also it's attachment issues, right? Being unable to connect with other people. It could be other women, it could be men. And also it just shows in being avoidant, in being anxious around connections, where you become either too clingy because you're afraid of abandonment or you're afraid of rejection, the way it always happened to you in childhood or in your childhood home. And also you can be avoidant, where you are trying by all means not to seem bothered by connection, not wanting to connect, not wanting to be that person that validates their partner by putting labels to your relationship. So there's a lot of psychological impacts that happen that then affect our relationships and affect how we relate to ourselves as well. And not just the dysregulated nervous system, not just, the attachment issues. There's also the toxic shame that emanates from growing up in households that wanted us to deny parts of ourselves to fit into that family or to fit into that unit. Is we carry toxic shame around our bodies, we carry toxic shame around our desires, around just life, where you find yourself having this inner critic that discourages you and criticizes you heavily, because of the toxic shame that you have for just being human. Because when we're children and we're abandoned and not loved properly, what happens is then we crave that to not being, enough, or not being perfect, and having to change parts of ourselves. And when we become adults, what happens is we carry this toxic shame around just being human, right? So every single thing about life could trigger just shame around connections, shame around speaking your truth, shame around showing up authentically, shame around your body, shame around, friendships, just so much shame around just existing as a human being, shame around making mistakes, shame around, just asking for what you want. So shame is the biggest one for most people with a motherhood. Having not had that adequate love that is required for our brain to develop and our nervous system to wire in a healthy way, we carry so much shame around just being human. And that is the first telltale sign around just having that mother wound, along with the other ones that I have talked about.
Manifest, but I need you to go back to the patriarchal conditioning that we get directly from our mothers that we don't identify as an unhealed wound, because this is pertaining to how we treat women, who we see as a threat to men, how we view women in corporate, who we see as a threat, and that stifles the feminine relationships amongst women. So I wanted you to just go back to what you mean when you say that the mother wound ultimately helps us perpetuate more and more.
Got the question, even if you cut them. So by the mother wound, so the mother wound, as I have already said, could also be cultural, right? Where we exist in a very patriarchal society and women internalize this patriarchy as a way to survive, right? One of the things that has been happening for centuries is the feminine has been under attack, right? Women have been vilified, women have been abused, women have been oppressed for the longest time. Even in the Bible, even in religious texts, when you read about the experience of women, you could sense that patriarchy is something that has been around for the longest time, and therefore women have been oppressed for the longest time. And the thing with oppression is once we feel that we are unable to get out of it, we internalize it for us to survive. So our ancestors, our grandmothers, our great-grandmothers may have internalized patriarchy as a way to survive. So if you succumb as a woman to patriarchy, you will not be killed, right? Because women who used to choose to, embody their true essence would be killed. Women would be, publicly humiliated. So women in those days had to internalize that the only way to be safe as a woman is to internalize this patriarchy. It is to perpetuate it so that the oppressor sort of likes you, and in that way you are safe, right? And as I've already spoken also about epigenetics, is when there's a great fear or a great trauma that we do not deal with, it alters our gene expression, and that could be passed on to the next generation. And to me, I always say, internalized misogyny is something that our great grandmothers and our grandmothers gave to us as a gift of survival, right? They were saying internalize this patriarchy because if you do not, you die. If you do not internalize this patriarchy as a woman, you will be publicly humiliated, right? So our grandmothers gave us this patriarchal conditioning as a way to say, this is how you survive as a woman. But those are old tools now. As much as there is still the continuation and patterns of patriarchy that exist in our communities, there's also laws that protect women. There's also communities of women that will rally behind you and protect you, even men that are allies in protecting women. So what we see now is women who are using old tools of survival in a new world, right? We no longer need to internalize patriarchy as a way to survive, because if someone who has internalized misogyny, who is a misogynist, were to hurt me, there are consequences. Whereas in the past, that was not the case. I mean, in the ages of our great grandmothers, women wouldn't even have a bank account. So the only way that women had to survive in those days is to, worship the oppressor, so that they are in some way liked by the oppressor and not humiliated. So our mothers have internalized those conditionings or those programming that are as a way of survival of our great grandmothers, and they're continuing these patterns that do not have a way in, that do not have any use in the new world, in what we are trying to create, and in our evolution as women. We no longer need to survive by internalized patriarchy. We no longer have to survive by going against other women so the oppressor may like us. I mean, these are things that were, women were in danger in those days. You had to be against the women that went against patriarchy, because in that way, you wouldn't be seen as birds of the same feather. You would be seen as the one that is respectful, and in that way ensure your survival. So women had to internalize the patriarchy as a way to survive. And part of that survival was going against women that we find, were contradicting what is supposed to be the norm in a patriarchal society. So we don't need those tools anymore. But because we are not questioning the programming, it just keeps going and going. And this is why women, especially mothers, are the greatest perpetuators of patriarchy in their households. Every single woman that I speak with that has internalized misogyny, that has a mother who has internalized misogyny, will talk about how their mother was like the one that was, enforcing patriarchal programming in the house and rules that were supposed to protect the patriarchy. And it just goes to show how deep that trauma of patriarchy was for ancestors, for the women before us. And that's why it has been passed down from generation to generation. And until now we have the tools, and now we can question it and realize that we're using old tools in a society where we can embody our essence and be safe in being feminine, in being, just our true essence, and not having to worry about the sort of consequences that our great grandmothers suffered as a result of that conditioning. So patriarchy, internalized misogyny for women, for our mothers, was a way of survival. And now the responsibility lies with us to say, does this tool serve me now? Do I still need to internalize patriarchy to survive? No, I don't need to. I can be great friends with women. I can be successful and still be loved. My success does not in any way threaten my relationships. It does not in any way threaten me being in my feminine power and being in my essence, right? So it is our work as women who are doing the work, as women who are healing, to question these survival habits that we've gotten from our mothers and realize that now they do not serve us. And moving forward, we need to, find tools that help us thrive and not just survive and the way our great grandmothers and our mothers did. So that is the cultural mother wound that most people struggle with, and one that we don't talk about because we just think, it's just how it is. There are women who are pick-me's. There are women who are successful, and when they are, we have to find stories about them and try to vilify them. And that's just how it is. Women don't like each other. So because that's what we have been told. Women don't like each other. And that's not true. So our work is questioning these survival mechanisms, coping mechanisms that our ancestors have built around patriarchy, and finding out if they still serve us in any way.
Doesn't shut me down, because I really so I enjoyed how you explained really how we take our trauma from women who take their trauma and then who take their trauma, and then ultimately we are here perpetuating the same stereotypes that don't serve us by not understanding where they come from. And for me, one thing that we never talk about is really how deep the conditioning is. I remember when I was growing up, I had some resentment to my mother, but that was because she decided to stay in an abusive environment. I thought she could leave. And I learned later on, you don't get up and leave because you don't know what the next person is dealing with. I mean, I stayed in a non-functioning relationship for years and years, hoping it was the best. So I understand that element.
Yeah.
But one thing I didn't know I was suffering from is that because I was raised under her conditioning and her perpetuating the patriarchy, that I embodied that myself. I thought I was fine. I didn't think I was suffering from what do you call this way, where people feel like they need to have a male figure in their lives. So I was like, okay, so since I think I can go be independent woman part 2, I'm not affected by it. And like I said, I'm getting into myself. So what I realized was the fact that I was affected by it because in my shadow, I was dragging a relationship that was dead, and I didn't know why I was doing it until I was like, no, man, this is what my mother was doing. Because I said I hated it in real life, it stayed in my shadow, and then I projected it into my life because I wasn't aware of it. And another thing that I realized was that that independent woman thing comes from that, where you feel like you could do better, but then you don't look at how deep that I could do better is rooted. So we go directly in that patriarchy route of
you're
working
rebelling,
hard,
yeah,
which is what I was doing. I was like, okay, so I'm feeling like I don't have to have a man in my life, so I'm going the other route, which meant that I felt like I had my powers. I didn't need to stay in a bad situation, so I had that control factor of I'm not gonna stay in a situation. I need to be able to rescue myself because I felt like my mother was not able to. So my thing was I needed to be able to rescue myself, and that was that patriarchal energy where you feel like you can do better, but because you're doing better under the shadow, it doesn't work out. Because what I learned ultimately was that built up a lot of masculine energy in me where it was active and working, and neglecting anything else that was around me. My family, I didn't care. My friends, I didn't care. I didn't particularly, in my brain, thought I didn't care much about being in a relationship. And then, but that was coming because I was in a relationship that I wasn't working on. I was like, why am I dragging this thing? Because I could feel it's like dead meat. And then I was like, no, man, but this is what my mom's been punting indirectly to me all these years, that because exactly like you've explained it, she put us in harm's way to make sure that our father was comfortable. We would be the ones that got put under the bus. Don't speak in the house. Don't say anything when your father's saying anything. Stay in your corner. And she actually, like you explained it, like I was like, I never heard my dad say these things. I've literally never heard men say these things, that I have to wake up at 5 o'clock and make tea for them. It was my mother who made it was it normal for us to do these things. And so I built up a lot of that masculine energy, which is something that I'm still actively working on to release, because that was the conditioning. And I saw an article, I think it was like recent, well, maybe not that recent, and it was talking about the fact that females in corporate are striving and overtaking the men, and in working, in earnings, and in everything else. And for me, I felt like that was a direct correlation to the patriarchy that we're being taught by our mothers. And so I wanted to find out from you, because I realized that I thought I was getting good information from my mom, and I thought from the little that I thought I had, I was in charge of my life and I was in charge of what I was doing. It turns out I wasn't. And I kept diminishing my feminine energy every time that I chose to go with the active energy. And I wanted to find out from you, you spoke a lot about how the mother is the one that perpetuates these stereotypes of us valuing the masculine energy more than the feminine one. And I wanted to find out from you, how can we know that we're operating too much in the masculine, and how can we balance that? Because I don't want us to go back to, because you've made us understand that really it's coming directly from our mothers. So once we've realized that, okay, all of this masculine energy that I have is coming from the feminine energies in my house, how do I then balance that? Because I feel like we lack a lot of feminine energy, and I'm talking about females and as well as males.
Listen, for a lot of people, they have not experienced divine femininity. They have not. Our mothers being, perpetuating the patriarchy and operating from that wounded feminine of needing this man to be the father figure and not a partner, right? because that's exactly what was happening in those relationships that we witnessed. A lot of us grew up under wounded femininity, and because it was wounded and it didn't feel safe within itself, it was telling us that it's not safe to be feminine. So all of us are now carrying that feeling of not being safe in our bodies, right? So me resting feels unsafe. Me surrendering to being loved by a man or being in a loving friendship with another woman feels unsafe. Because one, I was raised by a mother who was always abusive towards me, who seemed to be jealous of just me being this little girl. Because a lot of women grow up under that dynamic where their mothers have this envy towards them, right? So they learn that from that experience with their mothers. We feel unsafe being in the feminine because our first template of the feminine was wounded, right? And in her woundedness was abusive, was neglectful, was, emotionally abandoning us and asking us to abandon parts of ourselves to appease to the patriarchy. So men are growing up under that experience where their mothers are in that wounded state and they're not in their power. So they don't get to witness what divine femininity looks like. So if they were to tap into their femininity, to them, it looks like that mother that was weak. So they see it as something that is weakness, right? If your mother had a dysregulated nervous system and she was a constant victim to life, right? Then you, because she's a template from which you learn what femininity is, you associate femininity with that. Even though we're not conscious of that, we associate femininity to our relationship with our mothers or who our mother was, right? Until we get a good picture of what true femininity looks like, a lot of us will keep feeling unsafe in tapping into that energy. Women becoming more hypermasculine and tapping into the active energy of wanting to have control of everything now, not even allowing someone to partner with them and be a helper in their lives, is because they don't feel safe, right? So the feminine thrives in a safe environment. When we are safe, then we're able to come out in our seductiveness, in our warmth, in our, in our nurturing, because we feel safe. But when we don't, then we want to protect ourselves. And is that feeling unsafe that has a lot of people rejecting femininity altogether? I mean, I look at the whole trend of boss girl and I was also a part of that. I just want to be a boss girl. I just want to get my money. That's all I want, But you realize it's because we're looking for emotional safety from these things. We're looking for emotional safety from the money. We're looking for emotional safety from the name or the titles that we carry. We're looking for emotional safety from the degrees that we have. These things are great. I mean, we also have to possess our masculine energy and tap into it and have it serve our lives.
Yeah.
So it's great for us to get our degrees. It's great for us to do well in our jobs. It's great for us to have these titles, right? And keep evolving as human beings. But if we see them as a sort of emotional safety, then we are continuing that woundedness and that feeling of unsafety around femininity, and we abandon that. And we need more of that. You look at the world, it is devoid of the feminine energy. Men don't even know what it looks like. That's why they come on the internet and they say stuff like, "What do you bring to the table?" What is it?
I was going to say exactly that.
What do you bring to the? They want women to prove masculinity to them because they have they don't know what great feminine energy feels like and how it helps build a home and how it's such a valuable energy to have in your home, because they did not experience it. What they experienced was toxicity, was woundedness from their mothers, was weakness, and they considered that to be, what feminine energy is. And because it feels like it brings nothing to them, they don't want it. So they're like, "Oh, what do you bring?" They want a romance. What do you call it? A bromance. with a girlfriend or with a wife.
About the builder.
Yeah, they're like, oh, what do you bring? And you're supposed to prove that you have a degree in civil engineering, that you run a wellness company, and the funny thing is, most of us actually attract these energies because we are like them, right? When we operate from our hypermasculinity and we're trying to prove our worth in those ways, that is the energy that meets us. Because I realized that with my work, the more I tapped into my feminine energy and I allowed myself to lean into ease, to rest more, to be, loving, to be nurturing, to be warm, to be, and feel safe within my body, to just embody my essence as a woman, is men like that don't come to me. They just don't even talk to me. We're not on the same vibrational level. So I always say to women who say, I always get these men who don't want to play or don't want to step into their divine masculine and also embody their femininity, that look at how what you are embodying, right? Because we attract like, right? So what you are embodying is what you will keep attracting. So we have to learn to wire our nervous system to feel safe being a woman.
Yeah.
And obviously you have to affirm yourself. It is safe now for me to be feminine. It is safe now for me to be warm. It is safe now for me to be soft. And you have to look for evidence as well that it is actually safe. And the more you bring that evidence into your awareness, then you start to believe it, right? It becomes like a natural thing for you to be this warm, loving, and who still stands in their power. Because we were raised by mothers who weren't standing in their power, we think being feminine means we relinquish our power, right? It means then now I'll be easily abused. If now I will be, easily exploited or taken advantage of. And that's not the case. It can be feminine and powerful, right? But that power does not have to look like the male sort of power that needs to do, right? You can be and still be powerful.